was working for Kermit Love, who is the guy who designed and built Big Bird and Snuffleupagus. And he was my puppetry teacher at Pratt when I was at Pratt. And when I was getting close to graduating, he asked me what I was going to do after I graduated from Pratt, and I said I was looking for a teaching job, and because I had majored in art education, but my art major was sculpture. And he said, well, why don't you come and work for me? And Kermit was a really well-known costume designer for both New York City Ballet primarily and Joffrey Ballet. And so, as well as having designed Big Bird and Snuffleupagus. And he, on the side, would work for a children's television workshop developing Sesame Street characters for the rest of the world. So while I was working for him, we worked on Sesame Street characters for Germany, for Kuwait, for Mexico, and he would also do puppets for TV commercials, all kinds of things. But Kermit's work was kind of, very up and down. It's like for 3 months he'd be busy and then he wouldn't have work for weeks and weeks. And I think after I had been with him for like 9 months, there was a long stretch where he had no work and he took off for a teaching job in Hawaii. And he came back and I was like broke. And I was going to go meet him at Pratt and say, could you give me a recommendation to go for an interview at Muppets? And I didn't even get the words out of my mouth. I showed up at his classroom and he said, I'm so glad you came today. He said, there's a new project at Muppets that's starting up and I think you'd be perfect for it. And that was Dark Crystal. Brian came over to New York, to the New York shop when I was at Muppets, and he would do very quick pencil sketches of what he thought the character should look like. And the Mystics, which was what I was primarily working on, evolved a lot from when I first got there, somebody else was building them, and they looked more like rocks. They were not kind of fleshy or soft. It just looked like a piece of stone. And it was hand-carved foam, urethane foam that was snipped out with scissors and then covered with latex paints. And I don't know, how it changed, but then the person who was working on those left because they didn't want to be working on somebody else's work for 2 years. Not that we knew that it was going to take that long at the time. So I said, I really love these characters and I want to work on the Mystics. So I sculpted the first head, and around that time, Jim was exploring using foam latex as a material and had contracted Dick Smith, who was the very famous makeup artist who did Raging Bull and Exorcist and a lot of famous films. And Dick came in, a nicest guy imaginable, and had no hesitation with telling us everything and how to do everything, which amazed me because a lot of people in film and television business covet their trade secrets, and Dick Smith was just like very open, and he said, well, this is how I do it. In fact, the Mystic's hand was 3 fingers, right, and a thumb. And Dick Smith had lost his ring finger in an accident. And I have photos of his hand. And I used them as reference for the Mystic's hands. So he showed us how to work with foam latex, and Muppets, as far as I know, was the first group to use foam latex for puppets rather than it being used as a prosthetic for makeup. So we started sculpting out of clay and then making molds in plaster and then pouring the foam latex and baking it in ovens. And it's like Brian was very easy to work with. It was funny because he would always draw me side views of the Mystics, and I kept on saying to him, you need to give me some idea of what they look like head on. And he kept trying to draw them head on, and he couldn't. He said, I just can't get that long nose, like foreshortened properly. He said, just sculpt it, Tim, So I did, and we it's like we developed a very interesting rapport of give and take back and forth in doing the Mystics. It's like I definitely was working from his drawings, but then at some point he was working from my sculptures and kind of back and forth. So it was a wonderful process. It's like, and the thing about working at Muppets is that everybody you worked with was at the very top of their craft. So there was a lot of not totally competition, but it was just like almost like upmanship. Oh, you can do this. Well, what if well, I can do this kind of thing. And it was great fun. It was very challenging, and a lot of people like Franz Fazekas, who did all the radio controlled puppets and Muppets and had worked for Bill Baird, building marionettes and performing marionettes, was a big influence when I worked there. He just would come up with the most amazing, things to make something look alive and move. From really simple little gimbal units that were pulled by strings to really advanced computer-controlled, radio-controlled puppets. And he was open to all of them. Like one of them was just this little bird character he did for Dark Crystal, where he just took a can of compressed air and he made the wings really light and made them on joints, and then he would just hit it with the air so that the wings would flop up and down, So he was a major mentor to me. It's like I learned so much from him. He was just a classic. And the guy who played Doc in Fraggle Rock, he was modeled after Foz. That was his nickname. Everybody called him Foz. He was a great guy. He just passed away, I think, this past year. He was like the original curmudgeon, It's like he would be really cranky, but he loved, helping. That it doesn't matter where you come from, anybody can do it. The thing is, now I'm not really sure about this because it's like you don't know what from the internet you should believe. But I was looking up where Jim Henson came from, because I was like, how did this guy go from, doing what he was doing to being this major influence in television and education and just this incredible resume of work. And I went online, and he majored, according to this one website, he majored in home economics at Maryland, the State University at Maryland. And I was like going, what? And then another website said theater, that he majored in theater, but I don't know which one is true. But it's funny because in home economics, the whole idea was that you learn to sew, you learn to cook, you learn to do all these things. And Jim just got fascinated with television because it was the beginning of television. He went to a local station and said, I want a job here. And he was still in college. And they said, well, we don't have anything for you to do. And he said, I don't, care whatever you have. I just want to learn how to work in television. And he just kept going back and pestering them. And then one day, like some producer walked out and said, do you know how to make puppets? And he just said yes, even though he probably had never made a puppet, and he went home and made puppets and brought them back, and they added it to some little segment on, you know, some television show, and it was, you know, from that he developed Muppets, you know. So it's like I learned that you don't have to have a connection within the film or television industry. Your father doesn't have to have worked in it for you to do it. You just need to do it. The Jim Mahon, who was one of the art directors at Muppets, I had finished working on Fraggle Rock, and he came to me and he said Hasbro wants to do toys based on Dark Crystal, and he said, would you sculpt the Mystic, the Gartham, and the Landstrider, since you know them better than I do? And I said, yeah, of course, that would be great. So I did them one up from the scale that they were actually done. And then I went up to Hasbro for, I think, 3 weeks and learned what specifically they needed to produce them. Because the biggest thing was, you know, it's like I didn't have to worry about undercuts when I was working at Muppets on sculpting foam characters, because everything would come out of the mold because it was soft. But when you're sculpting for toys, you have to be very specific to the parting line, and everything has to be drafted away from it. So, and depending on how much they want to spend on a mold, they usually, especially at that time, they wanted everything to come out of two-piece molds, which can be very challenging to, like, how do you develop detail or create character without, you know, losing what it is out of a two-piece mold. So that would be the biggest difference. But there's a lot of ways, you know, it's like when I got up there, they say, well, you know, rather than thinking it always as being front and back or top and bottom, think about it in 3/4, you know, like think about the parting line being 3/4 through the arm so that you can get more detail on the two opposing surfaces and it still releases. So, you know, it's like, you know, it's another thing of just learning a new approach.
What the hell's undercutting?
So if you're sculpting something and it's in dimension and you have a sharp edge curling under, that's an undercut. So it would never pull out of the mold. Like if you had like a wart on somebody's face and it rounded in underneath, the part would never come out of the mold because it would basically be locked in there. The positive part would be locked into the negative. So everything has to draft, you know, to the surface, okay. The front surface.